New Visions for Public Schools has been around for about 25 years, and during that entire time, the UFT, the Department of Education, a number of other stakeholders and community groups in the business and civic groups in New York have been together trying to think about how to improve schools. So the work I'm going to describe today is really the product of a long-standing, deep partnership with all those stakeholders, particularly in recent years with the UFT and Mike Mulgrew. One thing we deeply believe is that one of the things that is really challenging when you sit at the school level is the hidden complexity of schools. Principals or teachers are frequently described in component relationships to one another, and we rarely look at the interactions between those teachers and students over time. So an example is, it may be very easy to take attendance for an individual student on an individual day, but when you start to look at a school of 440 students, and you realize that the complexity of organizing that institution, the 30,000 lessons that'll occur in a typical year, the 240 or team meetings with teachers with notes and reflections required, the 200 annual teacher observations, you start to understand that we don't fully have an infrastructure built for schools that enable us to do this collaboration. Similarly, teachers confront enormous complexity in their day-to-day lives. They are isolated. They frequently have to think about what they're going to be doing on their own at night, creating curriculum through Google. And for whatever reason, for a long time, we've suggested that that is the art of teaching, and that isolation is endemic to being a good teacher. Working with the UFT, the Department of Education, and others, we've really thought hard about how to break down that isolation and acknowledge the complexity that exists in schools. And we've chosen a number of different ways to do that. One, we've really worked collaboratively to build data warehouses and systems that enable us to understand and personalize instruction for individual students. We've really gotten through the trust issues and the security issues and are really starting to use data collaboratively across 200 schools with almost 100,000 students. What does that look like? It means that an individual teacher can quickly determine whether a student is on track, near track, or off track to graduate at the secondary level. It means that collaboration can occur between teachers when they understand a young person is struggling in one or two classes. It means that principals can work to think through with teachers what the professional development needs are of those teachers based on the needs of the students, so that PD does not become an abstract issue. It becomes a real issue that's tied to the success of the young people in their classrooms. In addition, we've done a lot of work with Google. You didn't hear it from me. Google Scripts and Apps, and we found that you can really create very effective ways to address problems that are pedestrian to researchers but affect the day-to-day lives of teachers every single minute. Things like, how do you contact parents consistently, tell them about student absences, capture that information, and look for patterns to understand whether the school's interventions are being effective or not. That is something that's mission critical, as we know through the University of Chicago's work in 9th grade in particular, but we never build those systems that enable that research to become a practical reality or enable teachers to collaborate around these concrete problems. In addition to that, Tony Breich's work at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, I think, is instructive in thinking about what are the design specifications that need to be in place. Role clarity and responsibilities are one thing that we don't spend a lot of time on in schools, but figuring out, for example, who's going to be responsible for which part of a student attendance system saved a school almost 4 weeks of time for administrators because they finally figured out who was supposed to do what, by when, and how, so that by 11 o'clock in the morning they had accurate attendance data and could then start to focus on what are the interventions we need to make with the young person or her or his family to actually make a difference for those kids. So, instruction systems, similarly, I have 1 minute. I will not go through this slide. Please take a look at it. We're doing an enormous amount of work with teachers in our district. One of the things that's super exciting is in the era of higher standards, it's no longer enough to give teacher a single lesson or even a module. We have to start to shift to course sequence and scope and start to recognize that teaching is, in and of itself, a social activity, not only between teachers and students, but between teachers. And by doing that and making the work transparent in classrooms, we can actually build social networks that improve the quality of instruction and create a core of professional knowledge that make teaching something that's evolving and moving forward. We all had the great teacher in high school who did that work for 30 years and walked out with that knowledge. We need to be able to create systems where we collect that information, understand it, and start to enable teachers to deal with the diversity they have in their classrooms. Finally, don't take my word for it. Feel free to take a look at some of the work. Just as we ask kids to kind of present and publicly defend their work, happy to present some of the work we've done at New Visions over the last 5 years, again in close partnership with our other stakeholder colleagues. Affinity describes some of the data work we're doing and how districts can actually play a different role, a supportive role rather than a compliance role vis-a-vis schools and communities. The data work can describe some of the tools that we've built. They're all open source. We deeply believe everybody can use these tools. The only thing we ask you to do is tell us how we've screwed up and we can improve our tool, or how you figured out something new. Innovation in education has to be democratized. It's not just generated on top. And finally, Cloud Lab gives you a sense of some of the technology tools that we've built out. Again, all open source. I suspect that if you're in a district or a school, your technology person knows about this site. We have almost 1.5 million adoptions of things like Doctopus, Gubrick, Autocrat, named after me, a variety of different things that are being used by teachers and I think are actually making their daily lives better. Thank you.